I'm Allison from MuchMusic.com, and I'm here with Oren Peli, the man who's been making it difficult for me to sleep for the past few years.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm a reluctant horror fan. I get very, very scared, but I really enjoy them, and I've loved your film, so I'm very excited about the new one. And for people that are too scared to watch the trailer for Chernobyl Diaries, can you talk a little bit about what it is?
Well, the basic idea is that there is a group of American tourists who decide spontaneously, basically on a whim, to go and visit the town of Pripyat, which is the abandoned town next to Chernobyl that was evacuated pretty much overnight after the Chernobyl disaster. And it's a very unique and amazing location. There's no other place like it on Earth where people basically didn't even have a chance to pick up their belongings and just left. And in the last 24 years, 25 or 6 years that it's been abandoned, sort of like nature has taken over and wildlife has started invading the area. So it's just a very weird and creepy location. And they go to, and it's a real thing, people can actually go on tours in Pripyat. But in this particular case, they get stranded and bad things happen.
Right. And you found out about this through just doing some research on the internet about extreme tourism. Is this something that you've ever done or would be interested in doing? Well,
I've done a couple. I've went skydiving and I went swimming with sharks, but that's about it. I'm not particularly a thrill seeker, and for most people, when you go on vacation, you just kind of just want to relax or sightsee. But there are a lot of people who are thrill seekers and they want to get that adrenaline rush, and whether it's bungee jumping or base cliff diving, whatever it is. So some people do that kind of stuff, and in the case of tours to Pripyat, it's actually the kind of thing that doesn't feel that dangerous because you're just really going there on on a leisure trip. The only thing is that you have the factor of radiation, and as long as you're going with someone who knows where to go, in theory you're supposed to be safe.
And people do go on tours to Pripyat, but you weren't able to film there. The movie was filmed in Serbia. Why is that?
We actually planned originally to film in as much as we can in Pripyat, but for whatever reason, the Ukrainian government stopped allowing people to go in during most of 2011. Now you can, I think they opened tourism again, so you can go now. But when we wanted to shoot the movie, we just didn't have the access.
I would think just walking around Pripyat, it would be lots of inspiration for the film. Did you visit the city while you were writing Chernobyl Diaries?
No, again, we wanted to visit, and for the entire year it was shut down. So we had to rely on a lot of research, and we talked to people and nuclear scientists and that kind of stuff. So we managed to, I think, very faithfully recreate the look and the feel of the city.
Right. And your films are often based in reality, where it's just a simple house that can become terrifying, or a city where a real nuclear disaster happened. So for this one, there would be a lot of research to go into it, and there are still people alive that were in Chernobyl when it happened. Where did your research start? Did you talk to anyone that was in the city when the disaster happened?
Well, it was mostly a lot of online research. We read books, we watched a lot of documentaries, and mostly a lot of online research. We read as much as we could about the disaster itself and the way it affected people since then, and we watched a lot of video clips and photos of people who actually went on those tours and took pictures and a lot of videos. So luckily for us, our director, Brad Parker, is sort of like a visual effects genius. So he was able to look at the locations where we shot the movie and say, oh, all we have to do is add some CGI here and there, and it can look just about perfect.
Right. And you, speaking of Brad Parker, you've had Paranormal Activity. It's one of the biggest films of all time, but you're still a relatively new director. It was one of your first films. Brad, this is his first time directing as well, and you both have backgrounds that aren't traditional directing backgrounds. Of course, you did computers, and he was in special effects. Do you think that you found a common ground together because you had a different background?
Well, actually, in the case of Brad Parker, he's been a commercial director for many years, so he does have experience as directing. He's been a second unit director. He's never directed a feature, but he has an amazing level of expertise when it comes to that kind of stuff. But it was very cool to work with someone who is making the first feature, because he was extremely enthusiastic and very smart, and we just got along great. So it was a terrific experience working with him.
What is the difference? Because, of course, we know you mostly for making found footage films. What is the biggest difference with shooting found footage versus the more traditional kind of the Chernobyl Diaries look?
Well, in Chernobyl Diaries, even though it's not the found footage movie, we did want to kind of create a very authentic sense. So we had the actors improvise a lot, and we used a different shooting style. Our approach was sort of like, we're not shooting a horror movie, we're shooting a documentary where really horrible things happen to people. So we used a lot of the techniques that I would use in a found footage movie, but it's not a found footage movie. So it's sort of like a hybrid. If you're familiar with movies like the early Paul Greengrass films, children of men, traffic, that feel kind of very authentic. That's kind of like the look we were going for. But it definitely makes a difference when, you know, in most movies, usually you have kind of actors sticking to the script and everything is very structured. And we kept things very free form. We let the actors improvise a lot. And we wanted it to feel like we really, as the audience, going on this journey along with the characters, as opposed to kind of just watching actors reading lines.
Right. And with casting for your films, because there's so much subtlety and timing, who you cast is incredibly important to making your films, horror films. And the way that you cast this film, or this cast, it seemed very untraditional. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, the way we held the auditions, the actors didn't even know what movie they're coming in for. There were no lines to memorize. There were no scenes. So they would come in and sit down, and we tell them, we'd make up a scenario where, like, you're on a subway and there was an earthquake and now you're trapped. Go. Yeah. And so they didn't have any time to prepare, and we had to see how they can, you know, basically think on their feet and improvise on the spot without having any preparation. So it was a very grueling process for us and for the actors. And then when we found the individual actors, we put them together to kind of see how they get along as either a couple or brothers. And that's how we assembled our group, which ended up, you know, having terrific dynamic and chemistry.
And because you did film this on site, you were in Serbia, you weren't in a sound stage, did any of the actors get scared at any point? Because there's a lot of crew around. It obviously isn't as scary as when we're seeing it on film. But how do you know when something's scary? And do people on set get scared?
Well, we did a few things to scare them without them being ready for. Like, we would make a loud noise or bang on the car or something like that. So there were times that we kind of startled them on purpose. Most of the time, I think it was the scary things was in executing the stunts and dealing with the really cold weather that we had in Serbia, and also we shot in Hungary. So it was a very difficult shoot. Things went, you know, relatively smoothly, but not always.
And with films, a lot of time, with comedies, we hear about comedics having timing and comedic timing and how that's so important. But with your films, you've really become the master of horror timing. And your films are all about how long to make the audience wait and to see what that noise is, or if there's going to be a noise. When does the timing come into play? When you're writing the film, when you're in editing? When do you kind of gauge when it works?
It's all of the above. When you kind of conceive the moment originally, then when you're writing it, you have to you know, plan. This is going to be a moment where it's all about the anticipation, and you have to plan for it when you're shooting. But the actual you know, fine-tuning of it all happens in editing.
And we're living in a time right now where there's a lot of movies on zombies and on vampires, and there's a lot of gore and effects that way with films. And you've really gone back to the traditional horror role where it is anticipation and timing, and people have responded extremely well. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I can only speak for myself as a viewer, but to me, you know, I watch those slasher movies and movies that are really gory, and I find them entertaining in their own way, but they're never that scary to me. Look, when you see things that are very visual in front of you, to me they're less scary than not knowing what it is that you're dealing with. And I think your imagination is always scarier than, you know, whatever they can put in on the screen in front of you. And it's also the issue of, like, you know, if you imagine that, let's say there's like some monster over there, and you can take a look at it, and you're like, okay, that's bad, I'm going to run the other way. But if you're dealing with something that's either unknown or invisible, you don't know where it is, you don't know what it wants from you, to me that's way creepier, because you don't even know how to defend yourself against it.
Right. And horror films are such a visual type of filmmaking, and they really kind of cross language barriers. And you grew up in Israel. Were you watching American horror films growing up?
Not too many, because I watched The Exorcist when I was about 10 or 11, and that totally traumatized me. And after that, I stopped watching horror movies for a long time.
And now you've done that to people.
Yeah. Funny how that works.
Yeah. Do any of your films scare you? Do you get scared when you're in the theater watching?
No, because I mean, I know them so well, and I've been there. So I've been through the editing process, and I've seen the movie already, you know, 50 or 100 times.
Yeah. And for people that might be too scared to see the Chernobyl Diaries, what advice would you give them?
Well, I mean, if you don't want to watch it, no one's going to force you. But I do think that it's a very cool and unique horror movie. And I think if you're kind of person who really gets scared by horror movies, maybe you should go see it and get a thrill out of it.